50,000 Russian and North Korean troops massed ahead of attack. Why situation on battlefield complicated and generally getting worse, and how Putin reacts on large-scale drone attack on Moscow. We will talk about this with Julian Röpcke, senior political editor at BILD. Julian, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The New York Times has reported that 50,000 Russian and North Korean soldiers are preparing to launch a large-scale counteroffensive in Russia's Kursk region. According to U.S. officials, Russian troops are carrying out missile strikes on Ukrainian positions in Kursk region and deploying artillery against them, but they have not yet launched a large-scale offensive. What about your expectations? How do you think whether the North Korean government will authorize its troops to conduct long-term operations in Ukraine, or whether they are intended only for a counteroffensive in Kursk region?
Well, I think let's start with the situation in Kursk. As you mentioned, there are numerous reports of many thousand Russian as well as Korean soldiers being ready for deployment. I think I'm always a little bit skeptical when it comes to numbers. I think we have seen very good information from the 95th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, who have been defending Malaya Logna area over the last 3 days or 4 days against the 810th Marine Brigade of the Russian Federation. And they have been very successful. They say 28 Russian armored fighting vehicles, mainly BTR-82A, which is a very modern fighting vehicle, have been destroyed, and 100 soldiers killed and 100 wounded from the Russian Federation. So I think that is realistic. When we see counteroffensives from the Russian side, as we have seen 4 weeks ago, I think, from Kurakhove, it has also been 10 tanks. Now we have 28 tanks, so maybe 30 tanks. So, but this is always a company size, not even a brigade size. So yes, it is possible that we have 50,000 soldiers there all together in Kursk being stationed and deployed. But I think when it comes to real counterattacks, you have to see that there are only a couple of roads, a couple of possibilities. You have seen this in the footage that as soon as they encountered a lake, for example, the Russians had to withdraw because one vehicle was destroyed and the other ones couldn't pass by because there was a forest or a lake. So I think what we have seen over the past 3 days, this is realistically what we can expect from the Russians. So when it comes to counteroffensive, this means you have maybe on a big day, you have 300, 400, 500 soldiers involved, but not 50,000 at one point, of course. On the other hand, you were asking about the North Koreans. I think, as so many others before, the North Koreans will be tricked into fighting. We have heard this from many, like, I remember last year, I think it was some Gazprom private army. They said they should guard something. Instead, they were sent to the meat grinder. We have heard this from Wagner troops. We have heard this from Mobilized, that they were always used much more offensive than what they were told by the Russian government. And I think the same is true for North Korean soldiers. I think they will tell them you are on the rear, you are on the backside, you will only defend. But I think in reality, we will see some of them at least being used on the battlefield against Ukrainian troops, either in Kursk Oblast. I think this is the most likely version, or maybe even later in Ukraine.
Julian, if we're talking about a station in Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, has said that the situation on the battlefield is tending to get worse. The situation remains difficult and is tending to escalate. The enemy, using their numerical superiority, continues to conduct offensive actions and is focusing their main efforts on the Pokrovsk and Kurakhove fronts. How do you think, is Ukrainian front at risk of collapsing?
Well, I think the risk is always there. However, so far we are not seeing the whole front collapsing. I mean, we have a long front in Zaporizhzhia, for example, in the south, which is very, very stable from the Ukrainian side. We have also a large part of the front, I think, in Toretsk area, which is quite stable. You can see not only within the town, but also to the north and south. When it comes to Chasiv Yar, this is stable. When it comes to New York, this is stable. But as you rightfully mentioned, there are a couple of places, especially the area between, I would say, Pokrovsk down to Vuhledar. So that's 100 length of a front where the Russian army is very strong, is very much pressing, and is also having a tactical success, I would say, at least. They have been capturing around I think, almost 250 square kilometers over the past, let's say, 3 weeks, and they keep advancing. As you know, Seledovo was captured, Vuhledar was captured, and right now we are seeing the threat of Kurakhove being captured as well. And just as in the other towns, it is not likely to be a frontal attack. So they are not going all in. They're trying this as well. But you saw that I think the 46th Brigade there is defending very much, and they're destroying lots of Russian tanks going from Maximilievka to Kurakhove on the direct road. But at the same time, and this is the big problem, they are flanking the Ukrainian army. So they are coming from the south, and they have been close to a number of villages there. And also in Sontsivka, we have seen at least Ukrainian tank fire within the town. So this would mean that they already bypassed Kurakhove in the north and in the south. And this, of course, makes the tactical situation for the soldiers, I think many thousand soldiers in and around Kurakhove, very, very dangerous. If you see that the Russians already passed their positions, they are west of their positions, north and south. So in the end, I fear once again the Ukrainian army has to decide whether or not they want to risk encirclement and fight in an encircled town. I think they don't want this. Or the alternative would be to withdraw the forces in time to the west, and then, unfortunately, Russia would take another town. I think 18,000 inhabitants have been in Kurakhove last time I've been there in September. And it's a crazy situation, unfortunately. And of course, if you look at what's happening in the result, it's not a collapse of the army. It doesn't mean the Ukrainian army stops to exist or runs away, but it means, again, that another town, another 20 villages around, and another 200, 300 square kilometers fall to the Russian army. And of course, if you look territorial-wise at it, this looks at least a regional collapse.
Julian, I see the message that on the morning of November 11, Russian troops shelled Kurakhove in the Donetsk region. As a result, the Staroy dam of the Kurakhove reservoir was destroyed, according to Donbas News and Suspilna Donbas. According to Donbas News sources, the water in the Vovcha River has risen by 1 meter so far. In the villages along the river, the water is rising. And also, I see that Roman Pedun, head of the Kurakhove City Military Administration, tells Suspilna, quote, "We know that water is flowing through the villages located near the Staroy dam. We can't confirm the nature of the damage or its severity. We cannot inspect the dam because of the constant Russian shelling as of now." What do you think about this?
Yes, I myself used this dam and used the road on it in mid-September several times. And during the time, it was like it was a gamble to go over it, because in the morning and in the evening, the Russian army was shelling the dam. It was bombing it with FAB 500 bombs. And it was really a crazy situation. When we drove over the dam in the morning, there was little damage. And when we drove in the afternoon, there was much more damage. So I can at least tell you that the Russian army has been trying to destroy this dam because it's an important supply route for Kurakhove. There's only one route to the west, to Andriivka, and before, I think, Dachne is the first village. And this is the one going to Beretsky and Ilinka in the north. And as you know, the Russian army has been capturing Ilinka, and they are very, very close to getting Beretsky. So, of course, I don't know who destroyed the dam right now. I would say the Russians tried in the past very often, but I would also see tactical advances if the Ukrainian army would destroy it, because if the Russians are indeed very close to Sontsivka and very close to Beretsky, then they are very close of capturing the whole northern shore of the Kurakhove reservoir. And in this case, of course, you would have to destroy the dam, to not have the Russians closing the dam and attacking Kurakhove itself from the northwest, which would be really dangerous. I think the flooding, it is not so big. There are not many villages to the west of the reservoir. There are more villages to the east. So I think, and many people already fled the Russian shelling and fled the Russian offensive there. So I think the danger to civilians isn't that big because of the destruction. But of course, the possibility to use the dam as a supply route is now gone. It's now forever gone. I think no one can repair this under shelling. So whoever wants to cross this dam road now, and it's important to reach Kurakhove Kurakhove itself will have a big problem.
Julian, the inspection of the Russian strike site is complicated due to active fighting in the Pokrovsk and Kurakhove directions. Yes. And depending on the degree of damage to the dam, there is a risk of partial flooding of settlements located downstream of the Volcha River and a lot of villages. If we're talking about also the Zaporizhzhia region, the defense forces are holding back the advance of the Russian occupying army in the Donetsk region and the southern part of the Zaporizhzhia region. Can we say that the Russian occupying army is preparing for new assault actions in the Kurakhove and roboting the directions in the Zaporizhzhia region to take logistical routes to the east under fire control?
Well, I think the Ukrainian army has been preparing for an assault from the south. Last year's counteroffensive unfortunately didn't really work well. It didn't even reach Tokmak and not Melitopol and not the other towns in the area. But on the same side, or at the same time, I think the Ukrainian defense is very strong to the south in Zaporizhzhia. So the Russians, I would say, choose another road. They choose to attack Zaporizhzhia region from the east. And as you know, they are quite close to Velika Novosilka, which is part of the strong southern defense, but they're coming from the east. And there, I think, have been several reports of new trench lines, new defense lines being prepared near and within Zaporizhzhia region. So I do not expect another big offensive from the south, but I expect them coming from the east, from Donetsk Oblast. And as you know, it is only a couple of kilometers until the Oblast border to Zaporizhzhia, and also only 21 kilometers left to the Oblast border from Dnipro from the east. So I think the Russians are aiming at these Oblast borders. And I think everyone in Ukraine knows that you can never believe what Putin says. So no one thinks the Russians will stop at the Oblast border. They think, and the Ukrainian army is therefore preparing defenses of Pavlograd and other towns. I've seen this with my own eyes. They are preparing defense lines there because they know if the Russians reach the Oblast border, they will also cross it and they will try to get more of Ukraine. And this is why the battle for Donetsk is also a battle of whole of Ukraine.
October 2024 saw Russian forces suffer the most considerable monthly losses since the start of the full-scale invasion. Reported by Sir Tony Radakin, UK Chief of the Defense Staff, Radakin noted that Russian forces had suffered an average of around 1,500 casualties per day in October, both killed and wounded. He added that Russia's total losses are nearing 700,000 since the invasion began in February 2022. Do you agree that the Russian military almost certainly cannot indefinitely sustain a daily casualty rate of over 1,200 people as long as Putin remains committed to avoiding another involuntary collapse of reservists? Even an involuntary reserve mobilization will not resolve the larger problem Putin apparently faces in finding enough people to work in Russia's industries while also feeding the front.
Well, I think there are several aspects to the answer. First, I have to say again, I am skeptical towards these numbers. I'm very skeptical. As you know, I have visited the front line myself several times, altogether more than 12 times when it comes to the 2014 invasion, where Russia started attacking, and twice during this war. And I've been with units of the Ukrainian army, for example, with Karadak, who said that in the Pokrovsk area, they are killing and wounding around 100 to 200 on a very good day for them. For them, it was 200 Russian soldiers they killed per day. Also yesterday, we heard the 95th Brigade saying in the 2 days, they destroyed 28 Russian armored vehicles and killed 100 soldiers. So I think this is realistic numbers. We have to see realistic numbers that Russia is probably right now losing between 200, 300, maybe sometimes 400 soldiers per day. This is, I think, the absolute maximum. And if you see how Russians are treating their fallen, they're injured, they're not evacuating them. So they're not bringing them back, as Ukrainians rightfully say. For Russians, this is a one-way ticket to go to this to Ukraine, because there's just no infrastructure, no logistics, no idea to medevac them. So I would say we have around twice as many injured as we have the killed. So in this case, well, maybe we have 700 Russian casualties per day, killed and wounded. And I think it makes much more sense if you see these numbers, not only if you talk to Ukrainian soldiers, which will never tell you we killed 1,000 Russians yesterday, but also if you see the numbers Russia is mobilizing. They cannot mobilize a new brigade every 2 days. This is impossible. Russia cannot mobilize 3,000 new soldiers after 2 days because Ukraine says they killed and wounded 3,000 soldiers in 2 days. I think the numbers are much smaller, unfortunately. From this, you were asking if it needs a new mobilization for Putin. I think right now it is enough to let Russians fight and kill for money. You know, there are circumstances in Russia as really bad. This is a fascist regime. They are having so much propaganda, and they have so bad circumstances for the people that 1,500 euros a month, which is like triple of what Russians normally get as a salary per month, and with the promise of getting even a little more money for their family or a larder or some fruits or whatever to a little village if they die in Ukraine. I think this is right now, it seems unfortunately enough for Russian people to go to Ukraine and to commit war crimes and also to risk their own lives. We have this talk for a very long time if there's another official mobilization, but I think right now the Russian regime is mobilizing enough people with money and propaganda to go to Ukraine and die for nothing.
Julian, about war crimes, about horrible things, Ukrainian officials continue to speak of execution of Ukrainian prisoners of war by the Russians. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office announced on the 9th of November that it was investigating a video showing Russian forces executing a captured and unarmed Ukrainian soldier in violation of the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. Ukrainian Ombudsman Dmytro Lubinets mentioned that he sent a letter to the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross regarding the war crime reports. These actions must not go unpunished, and the enemy must be held fully accountable. Russia is a terrorist state that violates all the rules and customs of war. The international community must not turn a blind eye to such crimes, but international community turn a blind eye now. Agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I mean, killing Ukrainian prisoners of war becomes the new normal with the Russian war, unfortunately. I think for several reasons. Sometimes as bitter as it sounds, sometimes it's practical reasons. Russians don't have a way back. They have no infrastructure to go back in Kurakhove area, for example. So this is a one-way ticket for them. So how should they create a ticket for Ukrainian soldiers? It's no excuse. It's still a war crime. But I'm just saying sometimes it's very practical reasons for them. They don't know what to do with prisoners of war because there's no logistics to bring them back to the prisons or whatever. And sometimes, and very often, it is because of ideological reasons, because of hatred. We have seen this just a couple of days ago when they claimed someone is not Ukrainian, for example, and then killed him because they said no foreign fighters or something like this. Or if they make prisoners of war in Kursk, we have seen them really bad treating these people because and allegedly they were attacking Russia, while we are seeing this is just a defensive operation from Ukraine, a direct reply to the Russian invasion. So I think it's a new normal. It's an absolute outrage. It's a war crime. It's nothing someone in Russia is afraid about. And you were absolutely right. I see no echo from the European side, from the American side. I've been complaining about this before when there is just a report from the Middle East, for example, that someone killed someone involuntarily, or there was an accident, or some collateral damage. The German establishment, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they are complaining about this. They're having their own communiques about this. They talk about this very much. And this happens every day in Ukraine. Russia's doing this every day. So I don't see a verbal reaction. No one is commenting on this. And not to speak of new sanctions, because this is what it really would need. You would say that, and I'm happy that our probable next chancellor, when it comes to the polls, Friedrich Merz said this: you have to tell the Russians, if you do this, we do that. If you go further, if you keep attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, if you keep killing Ukrainian prisoners of war, we will escalate as well. We will come to your terms, and we will make the price even higher for you. Unfortunately, we are not seeing this so far. We are not seeing that the West reacts to these Russian atrocities. We are just seeing more of the same level of support, which is will probably even go down soon. And this does not really help Ukraine.
I also see new message about war crime that Russians suspected of executing at least 2 Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk region. So every day, every night, Russian unleashes the same terror. More and more civilian objects are being targeted. Russia only wants to continue the war, and each of its strikes negates any claims of diplomacy from Russia. Russian forces attacked the city of Kurakhove with a ballistic missile and hit a 5-story building on the 11th of November. The rescue operation continues. There may be people underneath the rubble. Russia kills us every day. Why there are no reaction from our partners? What can stop Russian terrorist attacks on Ukraine if we're talking about bombs, about rockets, and so on?
Yeah. I mean, there are many practical steps we could take as the West. I mean, we could give Ukraine the allowance, the permission to strike Russian airfields with the few weapons it has from us. We have heard from Mr. Zelensky today that France and Great Britain are preparing to send more Storm Shadow cruise missiles. But as you know, they are GPS-based, and the Russians are very well in jamming them. And we have unfortunately seen this in the past, which is one of the reasons why I think these missiles have not, cruise missiles have not been used to attack the Crimea bridge when it was still necessary. Right now, as you know, we have other supply routes to Crimea, unfortunately, to occupy Crimea. So I think there are lots of practical steps. The permissions, you could give new weapons. I don't understand why the Americans are not giving any of their 60 in US deployed Patriot batteries to Ukraine. I don't understand this. At the same time, also, when it comes to these Russian planes throwing the glide bombs, and I think glide bombs is an euphemism here, because these bombs are guided. They're guided glide bombs. They hit their target within only 10-meter accuracy. So we could do a lot against these systems. We could give Ukraine more weapons systems, Patriot systems, and especially more rockets or missiles. I think this is also important, because it also doesn't help Ukraine if you give them not 5 but 7 systems, but only 10 missiles per month. So what does this help? I'm not sure. The same about IRIS-T. You know, it's a shorter range system. We're giving more IRIS-T systems to Ukraine, but as far as I am informed, we are still giving the same weekly and monthly numbers which we gave last year, because we just say we cannot increase the production, which I think is a sort of excuse. So yes, we could do a lot. We could help Ukraine a lot. I don't understand why we don't do more. I think it would be in our interest, because everyone agrees that as soon as Russia sort of defeats Ukraine in its terms, whatever this means, this doesn't mean Kiev falls, but it means Russia is satisfied with what is done in Ukraine. I think we all agree that Russia will go to the next country, and they will attack the next country, which might be a NATO country, and then we have a much bigger war. So I think it would be in our interest to stop Russia where it is right now. I cannot answer the question why we are not doing this.
Julian, you said about Storm Shadow, about missiles, and the leader of France and the UK are expected to meet in Paris on November 11th. I think that they met to discuss a last-ditch attempt to persuade the US to allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with Western weapons before Donald Trump enters the White House in January. The Telegraph reported, citing UK government sources. So should we hope President Joe Biden will give the approval sought by Kiev for a month as a step towards cementing his foreign policy legacy, in your opinion?
Well, to be honest, I think it's too late for this, because first, Ukraine does not have enough cruise missiles to do sufficient damage. Second, I said about the electronic warfare capabilities Russia built against the Storm Shadow, and that's exactly the problem. We're giving Russia so much time, so many months to adapt, to learn, to study our weapons, and then just as we realize our weapons are not effective anymore as they should be, we give another weapon, maybe a Leopard 2 or something like this. So this really helped Russia. This to be able to see what the West is doing, and to be able to always get used to what it's doing. At the same time, you may not forget that even if President Biden agrees, we need a couple of weeks to get the missiles into Ukraine. We need the information about the airfields. I mean, it doesn't help if you have the missiles and the allowance if you don't have the information. It doesn't help if you hit an empty runway or empty taxiway. You would have to hit the bomber on the ground, the Tu-95. So you need timely information about when the aircraft are where and where you can do the damage. And at the same time, and last but not least, what about after January 20? I mean, even if Ukraine gets the permission now, and if it gets the weapons, and if it gets information, Russia knows that it only has to wait for not even 2 months until the next president will probably rewind everything, will stop all the allowances, and will go for a deal between the Ukrainian government and Russia. And I think this is just too late until the next US administration continues this policy and gives even more of the factors I just said. So more missiles, I mean, attacking missiles with a range of 360 kilometers, not just 150, more information, and also convinces, for example, Germany, which would be a very good thing, to finally give the Taurus cruise missile, because these cruise missiles are really strong. They are not vulnerable so much to electronic warfare, so they could be not a game changer, but they could really reduce the Russian air fleet within a couple of weeks if they were used with the right information.
Julian, we are waiting for Taurus and also waiting for Storm Shadow and Scalp. And about what is happening in Russia, Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, DIU, has reported that a Russian army Mi-24 attack helicopter has been destroyed by fire in Moscow region. A Russian attack helicopter was destroyed on the night of the 9th to 10th of November at the Clean Fired airfield in Moscow region. It is reported that the burnt helicopter belonged to the 92nd Special Purpose Instructor and Research Helicopter Squadron of the 344th Center for Combat Use and Retraining of Flight Personnel of the Russian Armed Forces. How would you rate such special operation by DIU?
Well, I would say, firstly, according to international law, Ukraine has all right to carry Russia's war back into Russia. I think that's the first thing we have to know. So a Ukrainian drone going towards Moscow or Saratov is just as legal as Ukrainian soldiers or special operation officers working in Russia and trying to minimize as much as possible the Russian war machinery. So, of course, these operations might be useful. They might also be symbolic, you have to say, because I don't know how many Mi-8 or Mi-17 Russia has. I think it might be some 100 of them. And we have seen this in the past when we thought, after so many T-90M were destroyed or captured, we always thought, okay, this might be a turning point. So at some point, we were all hoping, you remember, when they first used T-90, T-80, T-72, T-64, T-62, and then even T-54, I think we have seen, we all hope that this is the end. But unfortunately, it's more complex than this. Russia always has old stocks, which are just for kamikaze attacks and killing their own inmates or former prison inmates, but they also have a steady resupply of new forces. So when it comes, for example, to modern tanks or to modern APC, you can just see this in Kursk. I think there was a report of 30 BTR-82A supplied to the 810th just for this assault. So they are producing a lot of new material at the same time, also refurbishing older materials so it can stand up to the 2024 standards. But still, of course, every of these attacks is important because it gives the Ukrainian population hope, I would say, that you're not helpless and they're not just waiting for the next attack and waiting for the next cruise missile, but you're also trying to defend yourself and show Russia that what it does will have an effect on its soil.
You remembered about the attack on Moscow, and really on the morning of the 10th of November, Russia's defense ministry has claimed it has shot down 70 Ukrainian aircraft-type UAVs, over 30 of which were heading towards Moscow. As usual, the Russians claimed that they had shot down all the drones, including 34 UAVs over the territory of Moscow region. How do you think, how does such attacks on Moscow can affect on Putin and on Russian people?
Well, I think if these attacks indeed reach Moscow, and they didn't this time, because otherwise we would have seen this, there are always dozens of people showing up their mobiles to the sky and just filming what's happening. We have seen this in the Moscow region where they actually flew. I think if they can hit any strategic target, or at least symbolic target, we have seen the Kremlin being hit more than, I think, a year ago. And I think we all know why this is not happening again, not because Ukraine cannot, but because Ukraine may not. I think this is consensus that someone said, don't do this again. I think if this would happen, this would have quite a good effect on the public in Russia, seeing that it's not just a special military operation somewhere in the West, but it's a war which is coming to our homes and which is affecting our society. At the same time, again, I think these numbers are highly inflated. We have seen the material. We have seen, I think, maybe 3 or 4 of these UT drones, as I call them, small Bayraktar, because they look a little bit like this, but they're smaller. We have seen them over Moscow region, and we have, I think, 2 of them being shot down and then crashed also into residential areas. So I don't know if this is quite useful. I mean, it still shows the Russians, ordinary people, that the war they are supporting, or at least not objecting, is coming back to their homes. At the same time, of course, there's no strategic value by having a little drone which gets shot down and then hit some residential area. There is a strategic value to hit Engels Air Base, for example, or there is a strategic value to hit oil and gas infrastructure. But this special attack, I think yesterday or the day before, I think this was more of a symbolic kind.
You know, Julian, we are waiting for more attacks on Russia. And first of all, I thank you for this interesting conversation. I thank you for supporting our country. Please, guys, subscribe on our YouTube channel, like this video, and see you. I need to say that Julian Röpcke, senior political editor at BILD, was with us today. So good luck and see you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Bye-bye.